All right. Everybody welcome this beautiful Sunday, the 20th of May, to Problem Solver Politics. We're going to get ready to rock jock this thing. No pun intended, because we got a pretty cool guest on today. All right. Welcome to Problem Solver Politics. I am your host, Cardon Ellis, and we got a killer show planned today. In the studio with me right now, I just feel like I got to swallow a blood pressure pill before I even mention his name. We've got Mark Murphy, my moderate friend Mark Murphy. Here, say hi, Mark.
Hey, what can I say? You know, a former Republican whose party left him, so I became one of those liberal bleeding hearts. You know, what can I say? And accuse me of being a fascist as well.
Oh,
Interesting.
No. We don't launch the fascism word here unless it's completely deserved yet, and you haven't stepped in the mire yet.
I'm working on it.
You're working on it, yeah. Okay, so Mark is a totally awesome guy. He's the Mitt Romney of the Democratic Party, all right? Just look at him. If you can go to Facebook Live right now, he's got that perfect little tinge of salt and pepper hair.
Corporate executive, you know, in that higher echelon, Eagle Scout, military, veteran, all that good stuff, and disabled.
Oh, rock on.
Yeah.
And I noticed you wore a tie that's perfectly 50% blue, perfectly 50% red, just for Problem Solver Politics.
Got to be balanced.
Where we solve problems over party affiliation. And we also have a huge guest in the studio today. Everybody put your hands together for Jess Phoenix! Woo! I'm going to bring I'm just bring some people in to clap next time.
Okay.
Because when 3 people are clapping,
yeah, it's
half-heartedly.
better than one hand clapping, always.
It's better than one hand clapping. All right. So Jess Phoenix, guys, is a candidate for the 25th Congressional District. She wants to make it to Washington. She wants to unseat Steve Knight for his congressional seat. Now, I have to give her some props. We give credit where credit is due. I was driving down Centurion Boulevard right by Saugus High the other day coming from a job, and the only sign on that little bit of real estate, the only sign in that entire intersection by which thousands of people pass was a small 8x10 Jess Phoenix political campaign sign. I thought, you know what? There was some dedicated high schooler kid, probably the child of one of your activists, but nonetheless, totally put it there, risked their little head, running across traffic to stick it there. And I thought, all right, we have got to get this girl on the show. But it's actually for much deeper reasons than your placement of political signs.
Well, you do have to be a little bit guerrilla style in this day and age with, the whole information overload we're all dealing with, right? So those signs, which people may have noticed all around the SCV and all through the district, are black, which is an unusual color choice as well for a political sign. So that gets a lot of attention. So the smaller signs actually seem to be pretty effective.
That, and also people that like her really like her, because I rarely actually see one of her signs in front of a yard. I usually see about 15. Now, I don't know if that's because you're so controversial that people are afraid to hand them out when they go to your meetings, and they're just really enthusiastic. But we're about to find out today. Give us your 30 seconds. Tell us your story.
Sure. So I'm a volcanologist. So I do study active volcanoes and not Mr. Spock, although I do love Star Trek. I actually founded and run a nonprofit called Blueprint Earth that does environmental science research and education. We're actually cataloging part of California's Mojave Desert at no cost to the students who participate, so they get a hands-on, real-world experience with scientists from industry, academia, and different research organizations. And it's a really amazing project because we're trying to figure out how we can work with natural resource companies to help them do a better job of rehabilitating environments once their projects are done, and for humanitarian purposes as well. So damaged environments, whether they're human-caused or natural disasters, we can take a blueprint of a healthy environment and then go ahead and replicate it in a damaged one. So that's what we've been working on, and I decided to run for Congress when I realized that we have our current representative sits on the House Science Committee, has no scientific background, and basically has said that California's preparations for climate change are foolish. And I have actually studied climate change in person on a few different continents. Well, Hawaii is not its own continent, but Hawaii, down in South America and in North America. And I can tell you the climate's changing. We can quibble about why it's changing. That doesn't matter to me. It's just we need to address it. And we need people in office who can address it.
I understand you have 11 years in the background, and you also started out in Hawaii in an area that now we're getting a lot of attention in news. What's happening there?
So Kilauea volcano is one of the first volcanoes I worked on. I worked on Mauna Loa volcano as well, which is the only other active one on that island. And Kilauea is currently in the middle of a new phase of eruptive activity. It's been erupting continuously since 1983. It is the world's most active volcano. And it's typically not very hazardous because the lava flows tend to ooze more than explode. However, the most recent activity, the big shift, has been that we've seen explosive eruptions happen at the summit. And that has been decades since we've seen anything like that. So it is hazardous. The lava now is going across one of the major highways and is entering the ocean. When you have lava that can reach 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit mixing with seawater, you get something called laze, which is basically lava haze is, I guess, one way to remember.
Isn't that the thing they put around you in Hawaii? You know?
Yeah, that's a little, it's Laze. So I guess if you're fuzzy because you've had too many Mai Tais, sure. But no, it forms an acid and throws out glass particles when the lava hits the seawater. So it's very hazardous. You don't want to breathe it. Not to mention people's houses are being consumed. I think I heard 44 at last count have been destroyed. So it's a hazardous situation, and it's currently evolving. But you know what? We have the United States, and this is something most people don't know. Depending on what day it is, we either have the third or second highest number of active volcanoes of any country on the planet.
Wait, hold on a second. Repeat that. In America, we have
the second or third highest number of active volcanoes of any country on the planet.
And this is not counting the super volcano up at the big Yellowstone
National
National Park.
That counts it because it is inactive. It's active.
Well, hold
but
on a
not
second.
Erupting.
Is that stat okay? So like divorce stats, and people always like to say, 50% of divorce or marriages end in divorce. So why try? It's a coin flip, But it's because there's one dude getting married and divorced 5 times that skews the statistic of the vast majority that succeed.
That's my friends.
It's your friends. I think all of us have those friends. That's
everybody
a bipartisan
knows somebody.
affair. Is that country, us having more volcanoes, stat skewed by all of them in Hawaii?
No, it's actually Alaska.
Is it Alaska? That's the other thing I was going to ask.
It's Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. They have a lot. And actually, we have active volcanoes here in California. We have between 8 to 10, depending on who you ask. And, it depends on how you classify active. But we do have Mount Shasta and Lassen Peak.
And Maxine Waters.
Oh, don't go there.
They call her Kerosene Maxine because she's so explosive.
You want to talk noxious emissions, I can point at Trump all day long. But I will say that Lassen Peak erupted in 1917, most recently.
Where's Lassen Peak again?
It's up to the northeast of Sacramento.
But we've got one between here and San Diego, I believe, right?
It's not going to do much though.
Oh, good.
Yeah, don't worry about that. It's
so
Shasta
we're safe
and
here on the faults that we're on.
Oh yeah, safe. Safe is relative because I do work in other hazards as well. So natural disasters of all sorts are what I've done work in. So not just volcanoes, but earthquakes, landslides, sinkholes, tsunami. These are the sort of things that, as a natural hazards expert, that's what I deal with.
All right, sweet. Now check this out. In the first round, we always play nice. Everybody plays nice, just small little jabs, kind of like Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield before the whole ear biting happened.
Yeah, I was like, when does the biting start?
I knew that's a bad analogy.
I have to kick him every so often. It's okay.
I was like, man, I could have brought a rock hammer had I known. But
that's what I'm going to say. I will find a better analogy for next week. You know what I'm saying? But, before we go on our first break here, got to give some really cool props. Things I love about Jess Phoenix that enticed me to actually invite her onto the show is not only the cool signage, all right, she chose a different color scheme that does not give away any kind of particular political affiliation or insinuation, but I really liked your website that had very specific goals, naming specific projects and a vision that you had for Santa Clarita. I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. And also, you're the only person I saw with an endorsement from Gaze from Space.
Oh, Gaze in Space.
Gaze in Space.
Yeah.
And spelled, if I remember, it was G-A-A-A-Y-S.
There's
in
3
space.
A's in
There's
each.
3 A's.
Yeah, it's supposed to be pronounced Gaze in Space.
Now I get it.
Yeah.
Did you see the Trekkie endorsements?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I was going to say.
It's because live long and prosper, volcanology. I'm just saying. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
That's a great way to go into our first break. I don't know about you, but I don't think it gets better than that on Problem Solver Politics. Don't touch that dial.
Every year, thousands of local children, teens, and adults receive treatment at the Child and Family Center for depression, anger, anxiety, abuse, thoughts of suicide, and drug and alcohol addictions. Our professional staff provides outpatient services at office locations, in the home, the community, and on many elementary, junior, and high school campuses throughout our valley. If you need help, Contact Child and Family Center at 259-9439 or childfamilycenter.org. Improving lives, one family at a time.
If you are at least 55 years of age and have a torn or irreparable rotator cuff, you may be eligible for a no-cost clinical trial at Southern California's Orthopedic Institute's Valencia Clinic. Call 818-901-6600 extension 1525 or visit rotatorcuffstudy.com to learn about a study of an investigational shoulder implant. Call 818-901-6600 extension 1525 or visit rotatorcuffstudy.com. Sponsored by Microair Surgical Instruments.
At Discovery Cube Los Angeles, every day is an adventure. LA's newest science center brings education to life and lets guests climb on a rock wall, soar over California in a simulated helicopter, or score a goal against an LA Kings hockey player. It's like a theme park for the mind. And beginning May 26th, take a bite out of Dino Summer with your prehistoric pass to the new Dinosaurs Around the World exhibit, all at Discovery Cube Los Angeles. Get your tickets now at la.discoverycube.org.
Do you like to rock across Africa?
Then the wait is over.
Africa Rocks! Africa's Greatest Hits is now available at the San Diego Zoo! And who could forget 99 red baboons?
Or the African crested porcupine smash hit, I Got Quills to Pay the Bills! Hey, don't get too close!
And the hits keep on coming!
Africa Rocks has all your favorites from 6 different African habitats.
Hungry like a leopard!
Ibex is back!
Harder, better, Fossa stronger!
And a new track from Kendrick Lamar!
Now, Larry.
Yes, Chuck?
A collection of this magnitude, I'd fly to Africa!
Well, don't pack your bags, friend. Africa Rocks is only available right here at the San Diego Zoo.
Wow, that really does rock.
No, it Africa Rocks.
Welcome to Africa Rocks. Experience 6 different African habitats, including our first ever aquatic enclosure with African penguins. Only at the San Diego Zoo.
Hometown, your hometown station.
All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I'm your host, Cardon Ellis, with our co-host today,
Mark Murphy.
Mark Murphy, the mild-mannered moderate.
You gotta have a moderate, somewhat of a Democrat there to balance the show.
All right. So, we got Jess Phoenix in the studio, who's running for the 25th Congressional District against Steve Knight. And her primary claim to fame is being a volcanologist. And that is the study of volcanoes, not the study of the Vulcan species. Or I probably even botched that analogy on Star Trek. But the reason why I wanted to get her on the show is for 2 reasons. One, I love, regardless of party, I love citizen politicians. Ronald Reagan always, I read his memoirs once, and he said something very interesting. He said, I never viewed myself as a politician. I always viewed myself as a citizen politician stepping up to solve a problem that I saw, okay? And when you study his rise in politics, it was directly correlated to certain problems and issues in society that he very much had a voice that he wanted to put out there. So I like the idea. I feel comfortable with the idea that we need to send to Washington, D.C. something other than lawyers. Dear heavens, it's like a pipeline. Go to an Ivy League college, study poli-sci, which is basically just Civics 101, repeated for 4 years straight by liberal professors who won't let you escape without thinking their way. I was hoping that would bait you into an angry comment, but it didn't.
I was going to mention that we've got some great experience right now with someone who's totally has a great legal background of 0, and I don't know if he actually went to an Ivy League school, but he did. But, hey, you know, if he marries enough people, maybe he'll have a really rise in his educational level.
So regardless, I am a huge fan of us sending people to Washington that aren't just the poli-sci that ended up going to get their Juris Doctorate and then graduates into some kind of clerkship or internship with a politician of whom they take over afterwards, moving into their district just to get the vote.
Or they run because they hate their job. And they're tired of lawyering. And I've talked to a lot of folks, that's what's prompted their runs.
Well, and also I feel very uncomfortable with having such a majority of lawyers in the office because I really believe what Harry Truman said. People never talk about Truman that much because he was such a boring guy. But really, I loved his quote when he said, "He who governs least governs best." I very much believe that when you have a bunch of people who studied law, live law, breathe law, write law, love law, that's why you get such a crazy hyper-regulated society like California's, because you have a ton of lawyers who are excited to put their name on the next bill. You know what I'm saying? I feel like I've incentivized a micro society of people that want to put pen and paper, when sometimes I think wisdom and approaching things in a case-by-case basis is more necessary, and I think citizen politicians would be better at that. So
You just described me.
Oh!
Yep. And you actually, so what I see is one of the big issues right now, and one of the reasons why I think we need different voices in the conversation, is that we're sending people who are essentially professional fundraisers who have been trained to argue for whoever is paying them to D.C. and expecting them to be able to be pragmatic and evidence-driven. It doesn't work. So that's why having different people, different voices in the conversation, single parents, sanitation workers, teachers' aides, retail managers, that gives us a different perspective and different angles about looking at problems that are going to totally change the way that politics operates in our country.
But I have a question, though. Here we're talking about gaining experience. How many years? You have 11 years experience as a volcanologist, and you went to college.
Yep.
And you got several degrees.
Yes, and I'm older than I look.
Okay. So, and in doing so, though, how many law courses have you had?
So in college, I actually was a history major. So I've taken constitutional law. I've taken a course on the American presidency. I've taken a course on U.S. Congress. And, of course, these were, again, in my undergrad days. So don't get me wrong. I'm not claiming to be a constitutional law scholar. But I did decide between geology graduate school and law school. I took the LSAT. I took the GRE. I did well enough on both that I had my choice. And this was after working for the state of Arizona for a few years in their library and archives division. So I was an archivist, archival technician, and I worked very closely with state legislators on helping them get bills ready and researching what they needed to put in there, and even on occasion helping them craft the language.
So you had more experience in law than Steve Knight did when he ran. Now,
boy.
And I know that Steve did have a background as a veteran in the military.
And law enforcement,
And
yes.
law enforcement. But it's one thing to uphold the law, it's another to craft a law.
Right, but I don't think that's, and again, to Steve Knight's credit, I don't think people need to be legal scholars to serve in Congress. And I say that for anybody, any party.
Okay.
I think we need to be making politics more accessible so we have greater engagement and we have a truly democratic process.
Well, you chose well going to geology class and not Juris Doctorate class, because I probably wouldn't have invited you on the show. Not that this is the crowning achievement of your political career, but I think it's pretty cool. So anyway, here's my deal. This is probably my major, I wouldn't want to say accusation or question, because it's a little bit of a frustrating or a little bit of a frustrated combination of the two. I love science. I did get a Bachelor of Arts, but that's only because after serving a mission for 2 years in Argentina, I fell in love with the Spanish language. So ultimately, I switched my major to Spanish language and
¿hablas
poetry.
español?
Sí, hablo español.
Oh,
con
muy bien.
fluidez.
Oh, excelente. Muy bien, muy bien.
Whoa, watch out. You just won the Latino. No, I'm just kidding.
Say Soños and no understand at all.
Oh, well,
So-
I'll say for you, mi madre era profesora de español. So my mom was a Spanish teacher before she joined the FBI. So I learned as a kid. So,
All right. Wow.
So my kids speak it. Come on.
There you go, there you go.
One more tally point for Jess Phoenix. So here's my big question is I actually switched my major to Spanish language and literature from astrophysics.
Very cool.
I was actually a physics teaching major to start out, and then I loved astrophysics specifically, that really deep Stephen Hawking stuff that makes your brain turn to pudding, that theoretical analysis and just the debates you would have and the thought process was what really, really pushed my buttons. And I was an astrophysics major in the beginning of my collegiate career. So,
And you're a Republican.
and I'm a Republican. Well,
Because
now,
science is
I've registered Republican to vote in one primaries
Well,
once.
I'm sorry.
I voted for qualified members of both parties.
That's true.
And you know how I feel about many of these labels. But I will say I tend drastically, especially in this crazy socialist state, towards fiscal conservation, which would lead you to have to vote for the Republican. But that's a different argument for a different day. Today we're talking about science.
And a wise argument.
Okay. Today we're talking about science. And I love science. I actually subscribe to that Facebook feed. I effing love science, you know?
Yep.
And it's amazing what observation and the empirical and the peer-reviewed process can do. But my biggest frustration is that now science has become weaponized politically. Hold on a second. Hear me out. I grew up watching Bill Nye the Science Guy.
And the new one.
Loved all of that.
You do want the
You
new one?
can't get through an interview.
The new one's good.
He's good. He's
Okay.
saving the planet.
You can't get through an interview with this guy or any of his cohorts now without it being an anti-Republican feast. There has been a trend towards weaponized science in the past 40 years. Don't forget, it was a scientist named Blumenbach that postulated back in the 18th century that African Americans were an inferior separate race and species, and we all bit the hook on that. Scientists...
People are still positing that,
convinced-
and those people are jerks.
Okay. Science proved many times in peer-reviewed research that cigarettes don't cause emphysema.
Oh, I have a whole
or
thing.
cancer.
I have a whole thing on that. so-
DDT was vilified as a carcinogen, which has been disproved a million times. In fact, we know the scientists were most likely feeding the rats aflatoxin, a well-known tumor-creating agent, just because the politicians who influenced them were afraid the Clean Air Act and all these other Endangered Species Acts wouldn't pass if many of Rachel Carson's postulations weren't necessarily true.
I haven't heard any of that, so I can't speak to that one. The others I can address.
I deal in pesticides all day long, so it's kind of crazy when you start studying.
I was an NBC specialist. That's nuclear, biological, and chemical specialist for the military. I used to go on a lot of missions related to that. I'm not so sure.
By the way, I completely
science.
I completely oversimplified that last argument for
I was gonna
time.
say.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that is my fear: is that Mark Twain said there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. I feel like it's turned out that there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's a way you can weaponize these stats to basically say anything you want. And the party that has been able to market themselves best with this, quote, science, has been the Democrat Party to push agendas of control. And the only examples I make are, gosh, I've read 8 studies over the past 2 years that say the carpool lane, for example, great idea. We thought that, you know what, if we just give one lane, we'll inspire thousands to carpool, and that might just clean up the carbon emissions. Horrible failure. At best helped 1%. Many of the studies say it was actually inconclusive. And it actually raises the carbon footprint. That by slowing down these other 3 lanes and starting traffic earlier and alleviating it later, we do not gain from this one lane what we lose from this lane. So if you really cared about the environment in a scientific, empirical way, you would actually vote with Republicans or with conservatives to eliminate the carpool lane. Great idea, didn't work. Let's think up the next good idea.
That you just described exactly how science is supposed to work.
But it doesn't because it's weaponized. So here's my question.
I know, I disagree. I don't think science is weaponized because science itself, science is inherently political. Scientific method is not. The science is political because whoever is funding the science, which is mostly funded by the government, they actually are making a political statement when they allocate their budgets. When they say we're going to fund, earth science research, we're going to fund space science research, they are making a political statement about what the priorities of our country are. And that's not just a U.S. thing. That's a global thing.
See, because I look at that in Santa Clarita, what you just said. We haven't had an empirical study done on the unarmored triple-thorned stickleback, which is completely unique to Acton and Santa Clarita. We actually have our own local endangered species. It's the only one, except for that frog, that actually is everywhere else in California. It's the only one that we can actually lay claim to as ours. Since a master's thesis in 1970, they have not put any money of the billions they squeeze out of us
but most
towards
of
that local study. Yet they have, I think it was like $3 million last year to study, for example, why female homosexuals gain weight faster than male homosexuals, when all of us already know the answer to that. Why waste $3 million? Okay, so I mean...
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that one, but I have a feeling it's a big old cow pie to step in. Yeah. So
no, it's just
okay,
because
we
everybody
know where
knows
the
that
money's going. It's for the defense. Having been in the defense industry for as long as I was, I understand we're putting a ton of money in that. But when you cut out basic research, a third of our medical health research has been cut out of the NIH. I know because one of my relatives is a senior executive there. I also know what's happened down at the CDC. How do you change that?
So here's the issue right now. We are seeing that what you mentioned before is covered very extensively with the cigarette industry, the tobacco industry, the manipulation that occurred. It's very well laid out in the book Merchants of Doubt about everything that occurred. And that is actually the same thing that we have seen happen with climate science. In fact, if you remember in the mid-2000s, we had John McCain and others saying, we need to address this. And we've seen the Department of Defense reports saying that what I've been saying on the campaign trail, which is climate change is the greatest threat to national security that we will see in the 21st century. And I say that with somebody who did have 2 FBI parents, and my mom's an expert in terrorism and foreign counterintelligence, and my dad's an expert on cybercrime and white-collar crime. So I worked with them on a nonprofit that had to do with preparedness that they founded. So I brought the natural hazards expertise to the table. I will tell you that we have our military and the budget that it has used to make this assessment. So if you don't want to see it from the scientific researchers' side, from the climate change studies that have been done, which I've been part of, if you don't want to see that as a reason to take action on climate and a reason to fund science, then it needs to be looked at from the military perspective, from the strategic perspective. Climate change is a threat multiplier, and it's something that we need to invest our resources in, not just dollars. We got to invest manpower and brain power into figuring that out.
Everybody at this table and all of our listeners out there, preferably on Facebook Live and the KHTS app, I think they all agree. Nothing could be more important than preserving. I literally wrote this right here on my laptop. I wish you guys could all see it. Nothing can be more important to everybody than preserving our natural resources for future generations. From a national security angle, it's just smart because we don't want to be dependent upon other people for gas, oil, national parks, any of that. From a moral perspective, from a religious perspective, we are stewards of the earth, so it makes sense from all perspectives. This is the only thing that bothers me. Whenever these... And I don't want to say these scientists, like the old angry man that's saying, get off my lawn, But whenever these reports come out or these movements get made, especially by those on the Democratic Party side of the aisle, it's always a Trojan horse for socialism. It's always a Trojan horse for control of an industry, whether it be cap and trade, whether it be controlling how we transit ourselves via the carpool lane, whether it be anything environmental, it's always about control. We never talk about, for example, with climate change, with carbon emissions, we never talk about, for example, planting more trees, reforestation.
Well, that's actually a huge
repairing.
Effort. That's a big ongoing effort. That
not as big as cap and trade.
Well, so here's something. I've worked in the natural resources industry.
Cool.
I worked overseas and I've worked for the world's largest 3D modeling company that had their natural resources division. It's Dassault Systems. And I've worked on 6 continents. And I will tell you that corporate social responsibility has been on the radar of these resource companies since prior to when I was working there in 2011, 2012. So this is something that is on the radar of all these big companies because they know that people do value the environment and our natural resources, and they want corporations to be accountable. So in order for the corporations to say, we need good PR, especially if we're going to be continuing to get resources out of the ground to have our smartphones, everybody still wants those, then we have to do this in a way that is environmentally as friendly as possible and doesn't leave big, ugly gouges in the landscape with just a couple trees on them when we're done. So that actually has been a growing trend of people saying, we have to balance this, particularly in the fossil fuel industry, which is where I have experience working. I do love when I have had people try to say, you crazy liberal, you don't know a thing about coal mining and you don't care about miners. And I'm like, I've actually worked in coal mines. Mm-hmm. So, yes. So
I worked for Mobil for 3.5 years.
Yep. That's a little bit of a mic drop.
But I am going to bring you up on one point. My son was at Montecito at Ground Zero when that little problem occurred earlier this year, and suddenly we lost 20-some people. So that's like bringing it home. We had fires here that not only took out homes, thousands of homes in the state of California, thousands of homes across this country, that's directly related to climate change. Jess, sounds like you can do something about this.
Yes, and actually, it's not a unique situation to our time. I love to point out again. I was a history person before I was a rock nerd. So back when in the Dust Bowl era, we actually had a partially man-caused and partially natural climate problem that we had to deal with. We had millions of acres of prairie sod that had been plowed under to plant crops, and then when the recession hit, people didn't want to plant crops anymore. So we had fields sitting fallow with loose dirt on top, and the storms came through and blew that dust all the way to D.C. So FDR said, we're going to get scientists on this, we're going to get local community buy-in, and we are going to work together to solve the problem. And that's what they did. They actually took the advice of the scientists, because when you start to measure an agenda, whatever your political agenda might be, versus the cost of losing our natural environment and our way of life, it's a no-brainer. We have to work together. Some problems are just too big, and they shouldn't be partisan. I mean, I'm a big fan of evidence and facts over party line voting, which is why I piss off a lot of people in the establishment.
So now, here's the deal, though. You mentioned something very specific, regardless of partisanship. So I loved your amazing softball to her saying, I think you can do something about that. That was the greatest little half commercial I've ever heard for a candidate on this show.
You can try one, too. I mean, I'm good with that.
But tell me this. This is
not theoretical.
Barack Obama once said, I wouldn't vote for myself if I believed I were the person I see on Fox News every day either. That's a very common quote, right? So I believe sometimes the conservative half of me, by nature, conserve means to kind of be the person that's like, well, hold on a second, let's think this through. Okay.
What's the other half?
The other half would be a bleeding heart, libertarian, constitutionalist.
A libertarian, okay.
Angry man who says, get off my lawn. No.
It actually comes out every so often, and it's really healthy.
So you're the guy in Gran Torino.
Yes.
So,
okay.
If I had Clint's money, I wouldn't. I'd be in the Green Peace Party if that's what it took. But I look at this and I'm like, I love the idea of a volcanologist going to Washington and providing that minority report, that divergent point of view. I love that. But this is where the conservative put on the brakes. How do I know you will not become the next Bill Nye the Science Guy, the next Neil deGrasse Tyson, that has completely thrown in their hat
What's wrong
with the
Neil?
leftists?
Yeah, I'm not seeing
I worship Neil.
I would love to see. I've subscribed to both these guys' Facebook feeds. Okay, and I have to tell you, it is an anti-Trump fest, which I don't think is healthy. When Republicans had to swallow 8 years of Barack Obama and his socialism, whether you want to call it socialism or not, I saw a lot of this respectful, it's the office of the president, we'll respect it. I always said myself, I'd take a bullet for the guy, regardless of how much I disagree with him. If he were ever under threat, I would take a bullet for my president because I am a patriot. This is my country, and he is a representation of my people that voted for him. With this not my president movement, I have no patience nor respect for those people because that rule book was not cheated nor challenged. It's a 250-year-old electoral system rule book. Mm-hmm. Hillary Clinton lost. Donald Trump won. Whether you love him or hate him, we got to put up with that for 4 years, and we can only have this system work if we work through discussion and persuasion. For sure. Not any of this kind of anti-this, not my president stuff. So I want to know, Jess, if you go and you win this vote, because I accept the fact that there's only a 1% voter registration or whatever that abysmal.
She's going to find the 3 million fraudulent voters who voted for Hillary. I know.
So I just want to know, what assurances could you give some of those people that are on the fence out there that are wondering, gosh, should I vote for her, Katie Hill, Brian Caforio? What kind of assurances would you give that you wouldn't just become another one of those guys?
Because my big problem right now that we're seeing is, I just actually want to say one thing real quick. The Electoral College is a holdover from the fact that we owned slaves in this country, and we need to rework that. We need to get rid of it.
Land.
Yes, but it was an appeasement towards the southern slaveholders.
It's not a holdover from the fact that we owned. It's well known that America was formed by a bunch of people who were landowners. So yes, half of them were slave landowners. Mm-hmm. But this idea that everything we have this revisionist approach to history where everything that is conservative is somehow racist.
No.
It's and I have a problem with that.
The reason the Electoral College was put into place was because it was to appease the southern landowners because they were losing a lot of their clout when we were designing that system. So
okay.
That's
I thought
why
you said you were in a history major. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, my family wore blue,
no,
I know what their
No, I did.
thoughts were.
I did major in history as an undergrad. So,
there's a valid argument for the huge place that slavery has in our history. That's a different argument for a different day, though. I want to know, just like I said, what assurances do we have, these regular people here, that you're not just going to become the weaponized volcanologist coming out of California who's going to pass every anti-capitalist bill out there?
Well, your job, and this is a big problem that I that I take exception with Steve Knight is that you have to represent your community. And this community is not 100% of any direction. We're fairly split down the middle. We've got a 3% registration advantage for Democrats right now. That's a change from where it's been in past years and the last 30 years for sure. But there are so many people here who are not being represented. And I think that doesn't mean that your votes are going to be, right down the middle all the time. But I think it is that you have to be willing to have the courage to look people in the eye and shake their hands and say, here's why I made that decision. You can't run away and hide. You can't shirk having town halls. You have to be accountable. You have to have that dialogue, because this is the thing where being a scientist comes into play. When I have new information, new data, I will change my mind on issues. That's exactly it. And it has to be, when people love to throw around political polls right now, and I look at them and I go, that one's flawed, that one's flawed, that one's flawed. I mean, you can see where the errors are in the data collection. So it needs to be actually rigorous, factual information. And I also tell people, I always tell my students when I work with students this, don't ever work with somebody who's afraid they don't know something, to say they don't know. Because I can't possibly know everything. No one can. And in Congress, you're faced with myriad issues that you are not going to know information about. So you have to be willing to say, let me go ask my constituents what their positions are. Let me go see why they hold those views. And then you can start to actually say, all right, where are the facts on this, and how am I going to stand up for what's right for our community and our country? You've got to hold both of those, and it's a balancing act.
Okay, so here's a question I got. You mentioned, for example, Steve Knight. Something that oftentimes I completely admit this, that oftentimes my political viewpoints are a little bit more of a how than a what. Okay. I focus very much on how people do things than what they do, with exception to certain issues. And that's why I love the Constitution, because the Constitution interrupts that human cycle of how we control each other in societies, from a violent, despotic, cycle of power to a peaceful, democratically elected representative republic, right? So that transfer of power is all of a sudden made peaceful and harmonious.
Thanks,
we have
George
the same,
Washington.
We have the same Constitution that's been going on for a long time. We're the longest standing democracy that has kept its constitution.
Yeah, France has had 14 constitutions in the amount of time that we have had one. So my question is,
France.
For example, you mentioned, I want Steve Knight to better represent us, so on and so forth. My heart goes out to this guy. I actually helped one of his opponents on the Republican side, tax fighter Troy, run against him in the primaries. Okay, so I did all the opposition research and everything, and I got to tell you, as a guy that didn't vote for him in the primaries, my heart goes out to him. I have nothing but respect for this guy, because for supposedly the Republicans being the party of no, this guy can't go into his office any given day because of these infernally perpetual sit-ins by every last activist that read a blog and thinks they know something about some issue he might have voted on, I know for a fact members of his immediate family have called friends of mine because they've been intimidated by whether it's protesters in front of his personal house or whether it's at events that he's been going to where they don't feel physically secure. This heckler's veto that is a product of the left side of our nation right now has become so pervasive that I don't see any Democrats saying, hey, whoa, now hold on a second. I see plenty of Republicans saying, guys, this is a little outdated.
Well, he could actually alleviate all of that by having town halls. And he's getting out of that by having teletown halls to some people. But I'll tell you,
what incentive do Democrats give the local Republican representative to actually have that town hall when it's just going to be a blitzkrieg against him?
Our district is still roughly half Republican, so he has supporters as well, and they do come out. I go to the Veterans Breakfast up in Lancaster. Knight goes to that as well. It is mostly Republican there, and he goes to that event. So it's not like he's constantly wading into enemy territory or something. Plus, we have way more that unites us than divides us, and I'm so sick of this extreme partisanship forcing everybody apart. It really makes me disgusted, because we are all here together. So we need to be talking to each other. We need that open dialogue from our representative and with each other.
All right, so when we come back, this is what I like to hear. She's going to talk about how she's going to be one big kumbaya fest to heal all of this partisanship. And then we got a couple of cooler questions about some of your initiatives that I do want to ask you. This is Problem Solver Politics.
Looking for the best return on your investment? Do you want your hard-earned dollars stretched to do the most good for your community? That means that out of every dollar donated, a full 99 cents goes directly to the need being addressed. Help the Children is in Santa Clarita, helping Santa Clarita families and other Santa Clarita charities. When compared to more than 1.2 million charities in America, Help the Children is rated the 7th most efficient charity in the nation, operating on a 1% overhead, and we receive no government funding for our operations in the community. If you are looking to donate to the good of the Santa Clarita community, please consider partnering with Help the Children. What is donated specifically for Santa Clarita is kept in Santa Clarita and will help over 5,000 families and over 10 other agencies. Please visit our website and or call our office to make a difference in our awesome town community. 702-8852, helpthechildren.org.
Your hometown station.
KHTS wants to help you save money. Go to shopkhts.com for half-price certificates to your favorite restaurants and businesses located right here in the Santa Clarita Valley. Huge savings on your favorite places. You can also buy them right here at the KHTS studio during business hours. Start saving now.
98.1 FM and AM 1220.
There's only one Santa Clarita plastic surgeon who is Yale trained and board certified, Dr. Justin Heller.
To be a board certified plastic surgeon like myself, what that truly entails is about 5 to 7 years of honed surgical training in reconstructive, all areas, as well as aesthetics, which means your facelifts, your breast augmentations, your body contouring, true training, and board certification. In fact, that's the only board certified area that can be achieved in this realm.
Dr. Justin Heller, warm, understanding, always available for guidance because he's local. HellerPlasticSurgery.com.
Your hometown station. KHTS AM 1220 and the new 98.1 FM.
All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I'm your host, Cardon Ellis, with my co-hosts.
Hey, it's Mark Murphy here. You got to represent sometimes a balanced view, so I keep him honest.
He's keeping us honest. And we also got in the studio Jess Phoenix.
Hello.
Candidate for the 25th District of Congress. Gosh, that was a horrible interest. The 25th Congressional District. I get us so mixed up because you've got the California Assembly and Senate, and then the different parties have different districts, and everything just gets all tongue-tied.
Try running for a year. You don't even know what your name is.
All right. So Jess Phoenix, if you weren't listening, sounds like a cool indie punk rock band. All right. But she's actually a volcanologist. That's somebody who studies volcanoes. She's actually been to Kilauea. All right, mad respect there. And she's running for Steve Knight's seat. We've talked a little bit about climate change, socialism, Bill Nye the Science Guy, the empirical evidence put forth by crooked scientists, and then also the importance of subjective analysis in the scientific method.
The Truckies lover.
The Trekkies lover. Most importantly, the Trekkies lover.
I'm in.
So, one of the things I said I liked about her was a very, what I perceive as well spelled out vision for projects that you want to do in the Santa Clarita Valley. I have often said, for example, why don't we have a convention center? And also, I very much liked a phrase of yours on your website. I am going to botch this because I don't have your website in front of me right now. But I remember how you said, why are we a bedroom community still when we could become a destination community? I have actually spoken, for example, with the group of pickleball players in Santa Clarita that love pickleball.
It's a thing.
It is more than a thing. Yeah. It is an amazing thing. And I am trying to help these people get a pickleball arena built on private land because the sports tourism
That'd be cool.
would be amazing.
Yeah.
And places like Simi Valley and other cities around California are building these 6, 7, 8, I don't want to say field, but 8-court pickleball arena areas that only take up the amount of space as, honestly, about a private tennis ball court. And they are getting populations of like 2,000 registrants in these pickleball tournaments, which could fill every hotel here from Magic Mountain Parkway all the way to Railroad Avenue. So I like this idea of your vision having unique and specific projects that would make us a destination city. I think there's a lot of economic advantage to that, and the conservative financial person in me likes that. So tell me a little bit about some of these ideas and what their financial impact would be, and how you actually think you could implement them, and that it's just not just something you put on your website to sound good.
Yeah, I hate putting things up just to sound good. It's not my style. So I've actually been saying for several years now that we need to make Southern California a global hub for green tech R&D. And that's been something, I mean, I'm on record saying that probably 4 or 5 years ago. And for the LA 2050 project, my nonprofit was part of, we were pitching an idea that we could be this global hub. And I think it's key because we do see other industries taking root around California, around the country. And I see a twofold benefit here. So not only will we stimulate our local economy and create jobs and make it so that people don't have to commute 2 hours down into LA to get work, particularly for the folks up in like Lancaster. I mean, that's a rough commute. But we really need to centralize this 21st century sort of job market here, because we'll also be saying, look, we're solving economic problems and we're solving environmental ones at the same time.
Okay.
So you've made both sides happy.
So hold on a second. I love everything you said about that. In my mind, 3 red flags go up. The first one is, I was just reading an article about the kid that first broke the PlayStation 3, and the first iPhone jailbreak was done by this mini hacker who has now broken like 9 of the top 20 most popular cars to become driverless cars. Everything that Tesla is hoping to do for $100,000, he'll be able to do on a $30,000 vehicle. And guess what is the number one thing stopping him? Pushback and hyper regulation. So I love this idea of LA County and Santa Clarita becoming this utopia for green energy and techie companies, and we're the next Silicon Valley. Yet what would entice the next Mark Zuckerberg to start the next Facebook in Santa Clarita when he's staring down the barrel of a 54.3% tax rate?
Well, you know, we're already seeing people accomplish that goal, particularly in Lancaster. So Republican Mayor Rex Paris, whatever you think of him, he has done a really great job of incentivizing green tech right there in Lancaster. There's an electric bus company that has
directly
started there.
tied to massive transportation and national security contracts, because Lancaster is
Lancaster
like 3 of the largest defense contractors. I mean,
we can incentivize that. We offer quality of life. We offer proximity to Los Angeles. We offer space. We offer people who actually have knowledge and real-world skills in manufacturing and aerospace and biotech. Plus, we have a community of people that, frankly, is sick of driving. So,
okay, so hold on a second, though. You mentioned quality of life. I think that's great, but I view that as atrophy, and I think most middle-class people would recognize that the middle class is dwindling in California.
It is.
We have
it's
been
dwindling
suffering.
everywhere. It's been
okay.
It's
So
hard.
I look at that argument. I'm like, okay, that's what we call a not a growing industry, but a receding industry. Second is proximity to Los Angeles. Okay, cool. Well, aren't we trying to make ourselves the destination instead of the bedroom?
But that's
community?
what I'm saying. We have transportation infrastructure in place there already for shipping and for importing whatever we need to build these things that we're going to be creating. So, you know, why not be close to the Port of Los Angeles? I mean, that proximity gives us an edge over places like, say, Las Vegas for doing something like this. We are close to one of the world's major shipping ports, so we got to take advantage of that.
Or in all the airports. We have it at Antelope Valley, what we can do at Burbank.
Oh, my gosh, the Palmdale Municipal Airport, that is a big deal. We really need to get that up and running. And there's been issues with that. But that sort of thing is what is going to help us look towards the future.
Do those issues happen to include environmental protesters?
Okay. Now answer me this.
Okay.
No matter what you do these days, aren't there protesters in some form of
that is
persuasion?
Either that or a frog. So,
basically, it's not a party without a protester.
But you also have some ideas about education, and we pride ourselves as being a very strong educational community. I mean, this place looks like Silicon Valley of the 1980s. We're ready to launch. So what are we going to do on the education side?
So I actually used to teach at Cal State Los Angeles, and I loved my time there. I got my master's degree there as well. And that was my first time going to a public university. I went to a private undergrad college. So this was my experience, and I thought it was amazing. And I loved the fact that we have so many students, particularly first-generation college students, who say, I want to learn. Give me the opportunity. So I think that we're ready for another CSU. We have great feeder schools with COC and AVC. Of course, in SEMI, they've got Moore Park College, so they're not quite in our district, but that's okay because I want to bring a CSU to our community. I think it makes the most sense to put that university in Antelope Valley, just based on the geographic proximity to CSUN or Bakersfield. But I want it to be a signature program for green tech with an emphasis in cybersecurity as well, to prevent hackers like the one you just mentioned from attacking us and taking what we have as intellectual property. Cybersecurity is a big issue of mine, and I actually want to. You may be familiar with the National Defense Education Act in 1958. It was to help incentivize education in things that would allow us to compete with Sputnik. Yay, Russia. So we needed to do, we needed to
Did the Democrat
that.
just say yay, Russia? No.
It was a little bit of sarcasm.
It was a Republican president who had a high tax rate and who believed in education and the military, but he also believed in that industrial complex.
Exactly. And so that's why we can actually spin that and say right now, let's get some federal funding from our defense budget into cybersecurity, because the wars of the future are already being fought today, and they're cyber wars. And I say this, my husband's actually an expert he's the global cyber strategist for the company VMware, which is basically the back end of the internet. So the Microsoft no one's ever heard of. So we talk about this stuff at dinner because we're complete dorks, and that's our conversation. But we need to prioritize it. And I think a CSU, AV, or if there's a better site here in the SCV, that's great. But I think we need one here in our community because we don't have a 4-year degree granting institution, a public one here that can actually meet the vision of the future, I think, which is really one that creates an economic driver that is going to be lasting for this area. That's what we're missing right now. We've got a few really great companies innovating and getting out there, and we have some amazing culture. In fact, my assistant campaign manager was telling me how much he liked the Buddy Holly play he went to just down the street here. And, he said the people were so talented. And I'm like, yeah, we've got everything. We have to just make this a community goal. And we have to say, look, we all have slightly different perspectives. Let's bring that to the conversation, and let's say, yeah, we're going to get this done.
All right. 15 seconds left. What do you got to say? Jess Phoenix, our guest, congressional candidate for the 25th District. Take us away. 15 seconds.
Well, first off, thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure being here. And you know what? If you want facts and evidence-based decision-making in Congress and you're tired of the same old, I'm not going to play politics as usual. It's not my style.
All right. This is Problem Solver Politics with Cardon Ellis, Mark Murphy, and in studio today, Jess Phoenix. Make sure you come back and visit us every Sunday at 7 o'clock. See you guys next time.